I was 2 hours away from saying, I do, when I opened a door I was never supposed to open. And what I saw destroyed me. But what I did next destroyed him even more. One phone call. That's all it took. One phone call, and I watched a man lose everything he ever built. His empire, his reputation, his future. All of it gone. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But nobody tells you how good it feels when you don't scream, don't cry, don't beg. You just walk away, make one call, and let karma do the rest. This is the story of how I caught my fiancé with my maid of honor on our wedding day, and how I made sure he paid for it without lifting a finger. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, stay with me. Because what I'm about to tell you will change the way you think about trust, revenge, and the power of staying calm when your world is falling apart. Welcome to Reality Stories Hub. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. You know that feeling when you just know something is wrong? Like your body is trying to tell you what your heart doesn't want to believe? That's where my story begins. And I'm going to tell you everything, because maybe somewhere out there, someone needs to hear this. I never thought I'd be standing in front of you, telling this story. But here we are. And I promise you, what happened to me will make you think twice about the people you trust most. When I met Daniel, I wasn't searching for anyone. I was content with my life. I had my little apartment in Barcelona, my job at the art gallery, my routine. I was happy being alone. But Daniel had this energy about him, you know? The kind that makes everyone in the room turn around when he walks in. He wasn't just confident, he was magnetic. Our first conversation happened at a charity auction. I was there representing the gallery, and he was there bidding on pieces like money meant nothing to him. Later, I found out it didn't. Daniel owned a chain of luxury hotels across Europe. We're talking 5-star properties in Paris, Milan, Monaco, the kind of places where celebrities stay under fake names and nobody bats an eye. He approached me during the cocktail hour, said something about how I looked at the paintings like I could see stories in them. It wasn't a typical pickup line, and somehow that made it work. We talked for hours that night. About art, about life, about dreams. He told me he built his first hotel from the ground up, that he understood what it meant to create something beautiful from nothing. I'll be honest with you. I fell fast. Maybe too fast. But can you blame me? Within weeks, he was flying me to his properties for weekends. We'd have breakfast on terraces overlooking the Mediterranean. He'd surprise me with little things, a first edition book I'd mentioned loving, tickets to see my favorite artist perform in Vienna. It felt like a fairy tale, and I let myself believe in it. 6 months in, he proposed. We were in Santorini, watching the sunset from a private villa. The ring was stunning, vintage, with a sapphire center because he remembered I'd once said diamonds felt too ordinary. Everyone told us we were moving too fast, but when you know. Or at least, that's what I thought. The woman who would become my maid of honor, let's call her Isabel, she'd been my friend since university. We'd been through everything together. Breakups, job losses, family drama. She was the one I called at 3 a.m. when I couldn't sleep. She was the one who held my hand through my mother's funeral. So naturally, when Daniel proposed, she was the first person I told. I remember the moment they met. I'd invited a small group to dinner at my apartment to celebrate the engagement. Isabel arrived with wine and flowers, all smiles and excitement. Daniel was charming, as always. They seemed to get along immediately, laughing at the same jokes, finishing each other's sentences in that easy way some people just click. I remember feeling grateful that 2 of the most important people in my life liked each other. The wedding planning started right away. Daniel wanted something grand. A ceremony at a historic estate just outside Barcelona, 300 guests, the works. I wanted something smaller, more intimate, but he convinced me we should celebrate big. This is once in a lifetime, he'd say. Let's make it unforgettable. And Isabel, bless her, she jumped right in. She helped with everything, choosing flowers, tasting cakes, addressing invitations. She spent so much time at our apartment that Daniel joked we should give her a key. So we did. I thought it was sweet. I thought it meant we were becoming a family. But looking back now, I can see all the little signs I ignored. The way Daniel started taking more phone calls in the other room. How he'd come to bed later and later, claiming he was dealing with problems at the hotels. The way Isabel always seemed to know his schedule better than I did. Oh, Daniel mentioned he has a meeting then, she'd say, or Daniel told me he prefers the orchids over the roses. I told myself I was being paranoid. Wedding stress, people said. Everyone gets cold feet. Everyone questions things. But deep in my gut, In that place where truth lives before your brain catches up, I knew something wasn't right. 3 weeks before the wedding, I came home early from the gallery. I'd forgotten my phone. When I walked in, I heard voices from the balcony, Daniel's and Isabel's. They were laughing, that kind of comfortable laughter that comes from knowing someone well. Too well. I stood in the hallway, frozen, listening. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone, it was intimate. Familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. When I stepped outside, they both jumped. Startled, like teenagers caught doing something they shouldn't. Daniel recovered quickly, smiled, said they were just discussing the seating arrangements. Isabel nodded, too enthusiastic, too quick to agree. I smiled back and said okay, but my hands were shaking. That night, lying in bed next to Daniel, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I was crazy. Was I inventing problems? Was I sabotaging my own happiness? I wanted so badly to be wrong. I wanted to believe in the fairy tale. But fairy tales aren't real. And sometimes, the person sleeping next to you is a stranger wearing a familiar face. The final 2 weeks before the wedding felt like I was living in 2 different worlds. On the surface, everything sparkled. The dress fittings, the rehearsal dinner plans, the excited messages from guests confirming they'd arrive. But underneath, I was drowning in doubt. Daniel became more distant. Not in an obvious way, you understand. He still kissed me goodbye in the mornings. Still asked about my day. But there was this wall between us now, invisible but solid. Like he was physically present, but emotionally somewhere else entirely. The phone calls got worse. He'd be in the middle of dinner with me, and his phone would buzz, and he'd glance at it with this expression I couldn't read. Sometimes he'd excuse himself. Sometimes he'd silence it and look at me like nothing happened. But I noticed. Oh, I noticed everything. Isabel was around constantly now. She'd show up at the apartment unannounced, letting herself in with that key we'd given her. She'd arrive early in the morning to help with wedding tasks, stay late into the evening. Once, I came home from work to find her and Daniel sitting close on the couch, looking at something on his laptop. They moved apart when I walked in. Just slightly. Just enough. I'm planning a surprise for you, Daniel said, closing the laptop quickly. For the honeymoon. Isabel's helping me coordinate it. I smiled and thanked them both, but my heart was pounding so hard I thought they could hear it. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. I checked his phone while he was in the shower. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. But here's the thing, there was nothing there. No suspicious texts. No secret emails. Everything was clean. Too clean, maybe. Like someone who knew to cover their tracks. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I told myself I should feel relieved. But instead, I felt worse. Because either I was crazy, or he was better at hiding things than I'd thought. My mother's sister, the only family I had left, called me 4 days before the wedding. She asked if I was sure about Daniel. She said she'd been married 3 times and had radar for these things, and something about him didn't sit right with her. I defended him. I made excuses. But after I hung up, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried for an hour. Isabel found me there. She'd let herself in again. She held me while I sobbed, told me wedding jitters were normal, that I was just stressed. She stroked my hair and whispered that everything would be perfect. That Daniel loved me. That I was about to have the life I'd always dreamed of. I wanted to believe her so badly. The venue was a 17th century estate in the countryside, about an hour from Barcelona. Stone walls covered in ivy, gardens that looked like paintings, a chapel with stained glass windows that turned sunlight into rainbows. Daniel had booked it for the entire weekend. The wedding party would stay on the property, and everything would be contained, magical, perfect. We arrived 2 days early. Daniel and I had separate suites, tradition, he said. His was in the east wing, mine in the west. Isabel's room was right next to mine. The other bridesmaids were arriving the next day. That first night at the estate, we had a small dinner with the immediate wedding party. Daniel's best man, my cousin, Isabel, and a few close friends. Everyone was drinking champagne, laughing, making toasts. Daniel seemed more relaxed than he'd been in weeks. He held my hand under the table, kissed my forehead, told everyone how lucky he was. But I watched him. I watched how his eyes would drift to Isabel when he thought I wasn't looking. I watched how she'd touch his arm when she talked to him, just briefly, just casually. I watched how they seemed to have this silent language, these little glances and small smiles that no one else seemed to notice. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe the stress had broken something in my brain. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a performance, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. After dinner, everyone dispersed to their rooms. Daniel kissed me goodnight at my door, said he had some last-minute calls to make about the hotels. He'd been dealing with some issue at the Monaco property all week, supposedly. He promised tomorrow would be better. Promised we'd have breakfast together. Promised me the world. I went to bed but couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I got up for water. The estate was quiet, just the sound of my footsteps on old wooden floors. As I passed the hallway that led to the east wing, I saw a light under Daniel's door. And then I heard voices. His. And hers. I stood there in the darkness, my heart hammering, listening. I couldn't make out words, just tones. Soft. Intimate. The kind of voices people use in the middle of the night when they don't want anyone to hear. I walked back to my room, closed the door, sat on the bed, stared at the wall. And I knew. In that moment, I knew with complete certainty what was happening. What had probably been happening for months. Maybe longer. All the signs I'd ignored, all the excuses I'd made, all the times I'd told myself I was being crazy, they all lined up into one crystal-clear picture. The woman I trusted most in the world and the man I was supposed to marry in less than 48 hours were betraying me. Together. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, perfectly still, and felt something inside me turn to ice. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I'll know for sure. And tomorrow, everything would change. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather. Sunshine streaming through the windows, birds singing in the gardens, the kind of day that makes you believe in new beginnings. Except I'd barely slept. I'd spent the whole night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing, planning. My hair and makeup artist arrived at 7. The photographer came shortly after. Everyone was bustling around, excited, gushing about how beautiful everything looked. My dress hung on the door, ivory lace with delicate beading, a dress I'd spent months choosing. It looked like something from a dream. But I felt numb, going through the motions, smiling when expected, saying thank you when someone complimented the flowers or the venue or how radiant I looked. Isabel appeared around 8, already dressed in her maid of honor gown, a soft rose color that complemented her complexion perfectly. She hugged me tight, squealed about how this was really happening, helped arrange my veil. She looked me right in the eyes and told me I was the most beautiful bride she'd ever seen. I looked back at her and wondered how she could lie so easily. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. By 10, most of the guests had arrived. I could hear laughter and music drifting up from the gardens where they were gathering for pre-ceremony drinks. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. Except for one thing. I'd left my perfume in the bridal preparation room, which was connected to Daniel's suite through a shared hallway. The layout was strange. Old buildings are like that, rooms connecting in unexpected ways. I'd stored some of my things there the day before. At 11, I told everyone I needed a moment alone. Just bride nerves, I said. I needed to collect myself before the chaos of getting into the dress began. They all understood, gave me space, told me to take my time. I walked through the quiet hallway. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I wasn't even sure what I expected to find. Part of me hoped I was wrong. Hoped I'd been imagining everything. Hoped I'd open that door and find nothing but an empty room. The door to the preparation room was slightly open. Not wide. Just enough to let a sliver of light escape into the dim hallway. I could hear something, movement, whispers. I stopped. Stood there for a moment. And then I thought about that voice in the middle of the night. Those glances over dinner. The way they moved apart when I walked into rooms. I pushed the door open. And there they were. On the antique sofa near the window. Him. Her. Tangled together in a way that left no room for doubt, no possibility of misunderstanding, no excuse that would ever be enough. His shirt was unbuttoned. Her dress was pushed up. His hands were in her hair. Her lipstick was smeared across his neck, his jaw, marking him like he belonged to her. They both froze when they saw me. Isabel made this small gasping sound and tried to pull away, tried to fix her dress, like modesty suddenly mattered. Daniel just stared at me. His eyes were wide, but not with shame. With calculation. Like he was running through options in his head, trying to figure out which lie would work best. I didn't move. Didn't speak. I just stood there, taking it all in. Memorizing every detail. The way they looked. The guilt written across her face. The coldness in his eyes. The disaster of what should have been the happiest day of my life. My wedding dress was hanging in the next room. My bouquet was on the vanity, white roses and baby's breath. The guests were outside, drinking champagne, waiting to watch me walk down an aisle toward a man who'd been sleeping with my best friend. Isabel opened her mouth, started to say something. My name, maybe, or sorry, or some pathetic attempt at an explanation. I held up my hand and she stopped. Her eyes were filling with tears, but I felt nothing for her. Nothing but cold, clear certainty. I looked at Daniel. Really looked at him. And I realized I'd never actually known him at all. The man I'd fallen in love with, the one who talked about building beautiful things, who made me feel special and chosen and loved, that man was a fiction. A story he'd told me. A role he'd played. And I'd believed every word of it. I'm not going to lie to you. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to cry, to fall apart right there on that antique floor, in that beautiful room, in that perfect venue. Part of me wanted to ask why, to beg for an explanation that would make sense of the betrayal. But I didn't, because in that moment, something shifted inside me. The hurt was there, yes. The betrayal cut deep. But underneath it all was something stronger. Something colder. Something that made my hands stop shaking and my mind go crystal clear. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me break. I wasn't going to be the tragic bride, sobbing in a wedding dress while everyone whispered and pitied me. No, this was going to end differently. I turned around, walked out of that room with my head high and my back straight, closed the door quietly behind me. And as I walked back down the hallway, past the room where my dress was waiting, past the sounds of celebration drifting through the windows, I pulled out my phone. Because I wasn't powerless. And I wasn't going to let him walk away from this unscathed. I had one card to play, one call to make, and it was going to change everything. I didn't go back to the bridal suite. Instead, I walked out through a side door into the estate gardens. There was a small courtyard hidden behind the chapel, surrounded by high stone walls and climbing roses. Private. Quiet. Perfect. My hands were steady as I scrolled through my contacts. The name I was looking for was near the top, saved under a professional title, but I knew exactly who this person was. More importantly, I knew what they could do. Let me explain something about Daniel's hotels. They weren't just his. Yes, he ran them. Yes, his name was on the properties. But the money, the real money that built them and kept them running, that came from investors. And the biggest investor, the one who'd backed 3 of his most recent properties, was someone I'd met several times. Someone who'd always been kind to me. Someone who'd told me more than once that they invested in people, not just projects. I pressed call. They answered on the second ring. Without any greeting, I said, I need you to pull your investment from Daniel's hotels. Today. Right now, before the ceremony. There was a pause. Then, in a calm voice, what happened? I found him with my maid of honor. An hour before our wedding. And I realized if he can lie to me this completely, he can lie to anyone. Including you. Another pause. Longer this time. Then, are you certain about this? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The voice on the other end went quiet for a moment. I could almost hear them thinking, calculating. These weren't emotional people. They were business people. And I'd just told them that their investment was tied to someone untrustworthy. Consider it done, they said finally. The paperwork will be filed within the hour. I'm sorry this happened to you. They hung up. Just like that. No questions. No arguments. Just action. I stood there in the courtyard, sunlight warm on my face, and felt something like peace settle over me. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about justice. About making sure that while I might walk away hurt, he wouldn't walk away unscathed. See, Daniel's hotels were his entire identity. His wealth, his status, his power, all of it was tied up in those properties. And without his primary investor, the whole thing would collapse like a house of cards. Contracts would be voided. Other investors would panic and pull out. Banks would call in loans. The Monaco property he'd been so worried about, it would be the first to go. I put my phone away and walked back inside. The estate was buzzing now. Guests were moving toward the ceremony space. The string quartet was warming up. Everything looked perfect, like a scene from a magazine. I saw Daniel from across the room. He was in his tuxedo now, talking to his best man, looking every bit the confident groom. But as I watched, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, and I saw his expression change. Just slightly. A small frown. He excused himself and stepped away to take the call. I moved closer, not obvious, just near enough to see his face. He answered, and within seconds his whole body went rigid. His face went pale. He said something sharp into the phone, then listened, and I watched him age 10 years in 10 seconds. He ended the call, stared at his phone. Then it rang again. He answered. Another conversation, more color draining from his face. Isabel appeared beside him, touched his arm. He jerked away from her like she'd burned him. Said something I couldn't hear, but his expression was pure panic. The calls kept coming, one after another, each one another piece of his empire crumbling. I imagined what he was hearing: investments withdrawn, contracts canceled, partners backing out. All within the span of an hour. All on what was supposed to be his wedding day. Guests started to notice something was wrong. The ceremony should have started by now. People were checking their watches, whispering, "Where's the bride? Where's the groom? What's going on?" I stood near the chapel entrance, perfectly calm, watching Daniel spiral. He made call after call, pacing, his voice getting louder, more desperate. His best man tried to calm him down, but he waved him off. Isabel tried to approach again, and he actually yelled at her this time, loud enough that nearby guests turned to stare. The wedding coordinator found me, asked if everything was okay, if we needed to delay the ceremony. I smiled at her, this sweet, sad smile, and said, "I don't think there's going to be a ceremony today." Her eyes went wide. "Oh my God, are you okay? Did something happen?" "I just discovered who I was really marrying," I said. "Better now than after the vows, don't you think?" Word spread quickly after that. Guests started murmuring. Someone said they saw the groom on the phone, looking devastated. Someone else said they couldn't find the maid of honor. The pieces started coming together for people, though not the full picture. Never the full picture. Daniel made one final call. I couldn't hear what was said, but I watched his last bit of composure shatter. He ran his hand through his hair, looked around at all the watching faces, and then he just left. Walked right out of the estate. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. Isabel disappeared too. Slipped away in the confusion. I never saw her again. The guests were confused, concerned, asking if I was all right. I assured them I was. Better than all right, actually. I thanked them for coming. Apologized for the wasted trip. Some of them looked at me with pity. But some, the ones who really knew me, they looked at me with something else. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. Like they understood I'd just dodged the biggest bullet of my life. The venue staff asked what to do with the reception. All that food, the cake, the champagne. I told them to let the guests enjoy it. Why waste a beautiful party? And that's exactly what happened. The wedding became a celebration of something else entirely. My freedom. The estate cleared out by evening. Most guests left confused but fed, having enjoyed an unexpected party that was supposed to be a wedding. A few close friends stayed behind, sitting with me in the gardens as the sun set, making sure I wasn't alone. I appreciated their concern, but honestly, I felt lighter than I had in months. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. No nightmares. No anxiety. Just deep, peaceful sleep. The next morning, I packed my things and drove back to Barcelona. My apartment felt different somehow. Smaller, maybe, but also more mine. I'd been spending so much time at Daniel's place, planning a future in his world, that I'd almost forgotten what my own space felt like. The calls started coming that afternoon. Not to me, but I heard about them through mutual friends. Daniel's business was collapsing even faster than I'd anticipated. The investment withdrawal had triggered a chain reaction. His Monaco hotel, the one he'd been so stressed about, filed for bankruptcy within 3 days. The Paris property wasn't far behind. Banks were calling in loans. Partners were suing for breach of contract. Everything he'd built was crumbling. Some people called me for the story. What happened? Why did you call off the wedding? I kept my answer simple. We weren't right for each other. I realized it just in time. Better a canceled wedding than a bad marriage. I never mentioned what I'd seen. Never told anyone about Isabel. That was their shame to carry, not mine to share. But word got around anyway, the way it always does. Someone saw something. Someone else heard something. Within a week, people knew. And Daniel's reputation, already damaged by the business failures, became toxic. The man who'd been invited to every important event, courted by investors, admired by peers, he became someone people avoided. Isabel tried to contact me once. A long email full of apologies and excuses. She claimed it had only happened once, that morning, that they'd both been confused and scared about the wedding. Lies, obviously. I didn't respond. Just deleted the email and blocked her number. Some betrayals don't deserve the gift of closure. My aunt called a few days later. Told me she'd heard what happened, and was proud of me for walking away. She said her first husband had cheated, and she'd stayed, tried to make it work, wasted 5 years on someone who didn't deserve 5 minutes. "You're stronger than I was," she said. "You're going to be okay." And she was right. I was okay. More than okay, actually. I threw myself back into my work at the gallery. Took on new projects. Started painting again, something I'd given up because Daniel always needed my time for some hotel event or business dinner. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I'd been neglecting while planning a wedding to a man who was planning to betray me. I traveled too. Took all the vacation days I'd been saving for a honeymoon and went to places I'd always wanted to see. Morocco, Greece, Croatia, places where nobody knew me or my story, where I was just another person exploring beautiful places. People often ask if I ever heard from Daniel again. The answer is no. Not directly. But I know what happened to him. It's hard not to when someone falls that far that fast. He lost everything. The hotels, his reputation, his social standing. Last I heard, he'd moved to another country, trying to rebuild under a different business name. I don't know if he succeeded. I don't care. Isabel disappeared from our social circle completely. I heard she moved to another city, started over somewhere no one knew her history. Part of me feels sorry for her, but only a small part. She made her choices. She knew what she was doing. The question I get most often is whether I regret calling off the wedding. Whether some part of me wishes I'd confronted them, given Daniel a chance to explain, maybe tried to work through it. And I'll tell you what I tell everyone who asks. No, not for a single second. Not even a tiny bit. Because here's what I learned from all of this. Trust your instincts. That voice inside you that whispers something's wrong, it's usually right. We ignore it because we want to believe in people. We want to trust. We want love to be real. But sometimes love is a story someone tells you while they're writing a different ending behind your back. I also learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud or messy. It doesn't have to involve confrontations or public scenes. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away quietly and let someone watch their own world collapse. Because when you react emotionally, you give them something to use against you. But when you respond strategically, calmly, with clear intention, you take all the power. Do I think what I did was harsh? Maybe. But was it fair? Absolutely. I didn't lie to him. I didn't cheat on him. I didn't betray someone who trusted me completely. All I did was make one phone call to someone who deserved to know the truth about who they were investing in. What happened after that, the business collapse, the reputation damage, that was all a consequence of Daniel's own actions catching up with him. A year later, I'm genuinely happy. I have a life that's entirely mine. I make decisions based on what I want, not what someone else needs. I sleep peacefully at night. I trust myself again. And if there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. You don't have to accept betrayal. You don't have to forgive people who hurt you just because society says you should be the bigger person. And you definitely don't have to suffer quietly while someone who wronged you walks away untouched. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. But sometimes, just sometimes, the best revenge is making one phone call and watching karma work in real time. I walked away from a wedding, but I walked toward a life that's authentically mine. And given the choice again, I'd do exactly the same thing. The end.